Hi, this is Jack Wilcox, and this is my final presentation for COM 601, Amelie as Equipment for Living. First, I'll tell you my thesis. We'll give you a synopsis for Amelie. We'll talk about which tradition we're going to use to discuss Amelie. We'll talk about what does equipment for living mean, and then how does Amelie provide equipment for living. How would the thesis be tested? What might the results be? We'll end with any conclusions or further discussion, and I'll quickly show you my references. So the thesis. The film Amelie provides equipment for living for people who feel isolated and are afraid to be vulnerable. Let's talk about the actual movie. So Amelie, the main character, is a French girl who has a very lonely childhood because of her neurotic parents. So for an example, her father is an army doctor, and as a little girl, he never touches or holds Amelie. Instead, he just gives her a monthly checkup. Um, because of the contact is so rare between Amelie and her father, whenever he does the checkup, her heart races, and because of that, he thinks she has an abnormal heart. So he keeps her homeschooled, and her cuckoo mother does the schooling. And as a result, she closes off her heart to all but the most casual relationships. As an adult, she decides to become a do-gooder, to help people in sneaky ways. So this starts when Amelie finds a little box in her apartment. It was hidden behind a tile in the bathroom, and it's the box of a boy who lived there long ago. So inside are little trinkets and treasures like marbles and a little action figure, things like that. So what she decides to do to help her loneliness is she finds the owner, who's now in his 40s, and sneakily and anonymously returns the box to him, and it affects his life very profoundly. One day, as a young adult, she finds her soulmate, a man named Nino, but she's too scared to talk to him, and Nino sees the world as kind of as comically and symbolically as Amelie does. And then at this point, her good deeds start to backfire, and she gets more isolated. Um, she has a friend who lives in the building who's very strong and tells her essentially, you're you're strong enough to talk to Nino. You're strong enough to figure out if he likes you back. You can, he says, your heart can take life's knocks. So she runs to Nino, and then we discover that he was waiting nearby the whole time. So she's able to move out of her isolation and be vulnerable. So which tradition should we use to talk about this film? I chose phenomenological because phenomenological is about personal meaning making caused by lived events. Our textbook author, Littlejohn and Foss, they say people actively interpret what happens to them and come to understand the world by personal experience. This could certainly be a socio-psychological study. It could certainly be a cybernetic study because the film talks about how little events seem to ping pong and affect other people's cybernetic systems. Uh, but this is really um, about how Amelie sees the world. And then, as a further phenomenological note, the authors say that as the importance of an object grows, so does its personal meaning. So, for example, she has some casual friendships as an adult, and those are perfectly fine. But when there's real risk involved, Amelie gets very scared. So when she has to speak with Nino, she is unable to do so because it's such a risk. There's so much at stake for her, so much emotion. So what does equipment for living mean? Well, Kenneth Burke defined this concept called equipment for living, and could talk about it in a couple of ways. According to Burke, rhetoric, a rhetorical text, offers strategies for dealing with a situation or for solving the problem inherent in it, our authors say. So they say that, uh, according to Burke, using a rhetorical text or theater allows the audience to encapsulate the situation and work their way through it. So texts in a film is a text for our purposes. It can sum up a situation and then offer us a path or a way forward. What are some other interpretations of equipment for living? Well, these authors, Zhang, Zhao, and Yang, really expound about theater being so closely related to rhetoric uh, that they're essentially inseparable. So through rhetoric and theater, we can safely play with our problems. We can experience something very difficult in a safe way and experiment with different ways of being. Terrell argues that a good film helps us more than a poor film. So without grist for the mill, we can stagnate in our examination of ourselves and our lives. Another way that equipment for living can be interpreted, Seifert says we can understand whether a film resonates by whether or not we feel it in our bodies. And then Jung's data indicates some of us carry and incorporate film into our lives, both unconsciously and consciously. So how does Amelie provide equipment for living? The character Amelie moves from isolation to vulnerability by using her tools, her inner strength, her creative problem solving, and her imagination. But as equipment for living because these tools don't belong to Amelie exclusively. Everybody has these tools and more. We have friends and mentors. We have perseverance. We have failure. And we have humor. We can use her path and mimic it. We could use it as a creative jumping off point, or it could be appreciated symbolically. So we can bring Amelie into our lives and use it as a tool if we feel isolated and we have trouble feeling vulnerable. We can use her as a template. How would we test this? Well, I would suggest using personal interviews. So a set of questions would be asked before screening Amelie, and then the participants would then watch the film. And then a different set of questions would be asked after the screening. And we can then look at the results. What might those results be? Individuals with varying backgrounds would be expected. You know, everybody's life is different. We would probably see some overarching themes. Some people might find the film helpful. Others might find it unhelpful. And maybe others have no opinion at all. So where does that actually get us? Well, what conclusions might we draw from that? Well, films can and do provide equipment for living, as we discussed with Burke and the other authors. There are many ways films can help us in life. Some persons might not find Amelie helpful or relevant. Other persons might find equipment for living within Amelie. But then, if they do, what directions might be suggested? Well, if a person is having trouble with feeling vulnerable, perhaps a therapist could offer this film as a tool. Perhaps persons could write their own Amelie stories as a way to move out of isolation and into vulnerability. Here are the references I used. Thank you very much for your time.